I was absolutely delighted with 2018's Marvel Spider Man. The game had so many fascinating parts to it, and it really hung together so well and resonated with me as a player. Had an absolutely fantastic open world web adventure through to an engrossing story that had me hooked for more. But the one aspect I wasn't expecting was the reimagining of Dr. Otto Octavius as a struggling independent researcher, struggling to pull funds together to pay for his research, and the stressful uncertainty that brought with it. Peter Parker has hung up his camera with the Daily Bugle and got a job as a research assistant, unwittingly realising that's an awful career move if you're looking for stability in your life. But he is held of a moral conviction that the work is meaningful and will improve the world. Dr. Octavius' lab is free to explore throughout the game, and it has a variety of little Easter eggs that you can explore. But one of these caught my eye. As well as zooming around Manhattan, you have an opportunity to carry out some small components of the research for Dr. Octavius, either solving circuit board problems or, more interestingly to me, identifying potential candidate materials for the prosthetic adhesives that Dr. Octavius needs. A spectrograph, an outdated term in itself, is actually a fairly common piece of kit used in research laboratories around the world. The actual term, an optical spectrometer, simply defines an instrument that shines electromagnetic radiation, which is light to the average layman, onto a material and studies what happens to that light, what is absorbed and what is reflected. Light has a very specific interaction with different atoms and molecules, as different colours, which a light of a different colour is a different wavelength, different colours of light contain different packets of energy. We know this because light, as we perceive it, is actually made of waves. Different colours carry different energy, so we know that red light, which has a higher wavelength than blue light, has less energy. If you have a material, then the molecules and atoms on the surface of that material will interact with that energy. But each type of interaction requires a very specific amount of energy to get it to occur. Imagine Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Can't have too much, can't have too little. It has to be just right. This is what's known as the quantum effect. Although there's much more to quantum science than that, and I don't want to get into the whole is light really a wave or a particle argument, the practical upshoot for us is that if you take a light source and scan all of the different colours or wavelengths of light onto a surface, then sometimes the material will respond and absorb that light, and sometimes it won't. It'll just shrug its shoulders with a big fat, "Yeah, you're not what I need," and the light will just bounce off the surface and back into our detector. We use the detector to watch and see what light the material takes, what it doesn't take, and then build a pattern out of those absorbances. So I was curious, what cutting edge materials are Dr. Octavius working on in his lab? His Octopus suit shows off some pretty advanced technology, and there are some major concerns about developing biocompatible materials that are biologically inert. This basically means that the enzymes in your body won't consume the material, but also won't cause irritation or damage to you with long-term exposure. This is a massive area of biochemical materials science, an industry that employs hundreds of thousands of people around the world. And if Peter Parker has really found a wonder material, then we need to know about it. There are 10 materials in total that unlock as you complete the game, and I want to know what each of them is, what it's used for, and if it really has the potential to be used in a mechanical suit to extract revenge on the people of Brooklyn. The first material is Polydimethylsiloxane, or PDMS as it's commonly known. This is a pretty common material that most people won't find too difficult to hunt down. PDMS is the most widely used silicone-based polymer in the world because it's easy to handle and produce, non-flammable, so it doesn't catch fire easily, and non-toxic, so it's not going to poison anyone if they accidentally ingest it. These are 3 important marks right off the bat, but the reason PDMS is so beloved is that because if you heat it up, or just leave it long enough, it changes its properties from an elastic solid, think a giant rubber band, to form what's known as a viscous liquid. So at room temperature you can grab a block of PDMS and stretch it really, really far, and it won't break. But if you leave it long enough, or apply just a little heat, it will start to spread and flow. This is great if you want to use it as a coating, as it will naturally, of its own volition, spread out to completely cover all the sacchages and little micro imperfections on the surface of your material. Imagine if you were painting a wall, finished, washed up your brushes, and then spotted one little spot you hadn't filled in. Oops, you'd say, oh, I need to start again, get the paintbrushes out, go through the whole palaver of putting the sheets down again, and you just tied it up. But if you were painting with PDMS, you could just shrug your shoulders and walk away, confident that, in time, it would spread out to fill that gap you left behind. Overnight, complete coverage. This is really, really exciting because it's the entire reason we need coatings in the first place. I already said PDMS is bioinert. Your body doesn't know what to do with it, so it just ignores it. Most things are not bioinert. Imagine if you get a really, really small splinter of wood in your finger. You get tweezers to pull it out, but the splinter breaks off in the middle, leaving a fragment inside your skin. Does that mean you are doomed to live with a fragment of wood in your body forevermore? No, of course not. Over time, your body's going to break that material down and remove all of the components it doesn't like. But if we coat that splinter with PDMS, the body won't be able to touch it, and you'll be stuck with that splinter for years. This is really important for people having surgical implants who want a new artificial hip or a knee putting in. Your body doesn't know what these things are, doesn't know what they are supposed to be there, that they are good for you. All it knows is what is natural and what is not. So surgeons have to make anything they put in your body out of bioinert materials to make sure they last. And if there's nothing bioinert to hand, then just coat it in one. Yet, despite all its potential, this is not where PDMS is used. Because it's not toxic, it's mainly used for surfactants. Think your washing up liquid or your shampoo. It's a natural defoamer, so it controls the volume and number of bubbles that form. You want some bubbles, but not too many. There's a sweet spot of just the right amount of foam in your shampoo. PDMS is used in medicine, cosmetics, hair products, skin products, and even lubricants for condoms. Alternatively, it's mixed into things like contact lenses so you can wear them on your eyeball without irritating them. Perfectly safe for long-term exposure and completely transparent so it doesn't fog up your vision. I said PDMS is one of the most common silicone materials in the world, and there is a reason we are mass producing this stuff by the megaton each year. So yes, this would be a perfectly valid material for Doc Ock and Peter Parker to use. Material L37 may be beautiful, but it's hardly cutting edge. The next choice, however, was a potential prosthetic contact material, i.e. something designed to sit between the main prosthetic and the skin, that is designed to prevent irritation. Apparently for this they recommend using a hydrogel IPN, and Peter notes that it looks promising and it could be a great tissue interface. And it's certainly more cutting edge than PDMS. After all, they are doing cutting edge research, and one of the themes of the game is that they need to prove to their funders that they are worth the money. But you may ask, what is a hydrogel IPN? Well, it isn't an IPN. There is no such thing as an IPN that you can go down to the store and buy, because IPN is not a material but a class of materials. IPN stands for interpenetrating networks. The concept here is that you take one material, in this case your hydrogel, and thread through it at a molecular level a second material. The two of them are woven together so that the chemical chains are tangled around each other so that they can never be separated. But what, per se, is this IPN made of? What has Doc Ock mixed with this hydrogel to make it interpenetrating? Well, the answer is fairly simple because, similarly, there is no such thing as a hydrogel, because it is also a classification of materials. The name comes from two terms, hydro, meaning water, and gel, inferring a composite that is made of both solid and liquid components. It is semi-solid. If you have something that is a solid, but that can flow or move when you apply pressure, then this occurs because whilst the material is predominantly solid, there are some gaps or voids between the material held together by a liquid interface that allow it to move. A hydrogel, therefore, is simply a gel with a large water content, where we have swollen the solid material with plenty and plenty of liquid water. Hydrogels are important, but they are hardly cutting edge. The world has enjoyed the benefits of hydrogel nappies, designed to be perfectly absorbent materials that can rapidly take up as much moisture as possible and hold on to it until we can dispose of it, for nearly half a century now. However, the cutting edge of this new material is that it is made of two separate components that are woven together into this new IPN structure. There are two different types of gels, which have different strengths. Maybe one is hard and one is soft, that are combined and then swollen with water to produce something brand new. Researchers have been developing IPN combinations for biomedical applications for years, and one of the prime reasons is because they believe it has applications in the field of drug delivery. This woven mesh of two materials still has voids in the network that can be filled, not just with water, but drugs and other active compounds, and this is a really important idea. Because when your doctor tells you you have to swallow a pill, the drugs in that pill have to be tested to prove that they can safely survive passage through your stomach. And once they get through that acid bath, they then have to get into your bloodstream, spread all over your body, and only some of the drug molecules will ever actually reach the place that they're needed, because whilst they're spreading through your bloodstream, your kidneys are doing their job to pump them out of your body. Foreign invaders, get rid of them. So you might be told to take them 3 times a day, with meals, or 6 times a day avoiding meals. And the reason for this is the doctor needs you to keep a high enough active concentration of drug molecules in your bloodstream for long enough for them to do their work. Every hour your kidneys are sapping away at them, so every 4 hours you need a top up. Every now and then you are horrendously overdosed with too much in your system, which could lead to side effects like nausea or worse. But then, a few hours later, you're underdosed and you're not getting the benefit of having the drug in you. However, if you then load the drug into an IPN, it will slowly leach out of the material and into your bloodstream. And we can predict how long and how fast the drug will take to leach, and then voila, perfect treatment every time. At least, this is the theory. But Doc Ock is not interested in chemically treating people. He outright expresses his disdain for Oscorp's move towards genetics and chemical engineering. He just wants these IPNs because he can modulate how tough they are, making them as comfortable as possible for long-term skin-to-skin contact, reducing the possibility of giving himself rashes or blisters. Hydrogels will absorb moisture from the skin so they will not get damp, preventing build-up of sweat which would lead to irritation and rashes. And they are breathable, so plenty of oxygen will still be reaching the skin to keep it healthy. And so on to material 3, a polymer carbon nanotube composite, praised by Peter for its conductivity, but he's worried about its long-term durability. So, a polymer is a long chain of molecules bound together to form one giant structure. Polymers are the fundamental building blocks of life. Your DNA is a polymer, but so are most modern synthetic substances like plastics. These long, flexible molecules tangle together to form solid structures which can be hard, soft, durable, flexible, anything you want depending on the type of polymer used. PDMS and hydrogels, already mentioned, are examples of polymers in action. So the unique part of this material is clearly not the polymer matrix. That's just a filler, but the carbon nanotubes that have been dispersed throughout it. Carbon nanotubes are a relatively recently discovered formation of carbon that exists in long, cylindrical layers just a few nanometers in length, meaning they are about a millionth of a centimetre in size. That is tiny. To most average Joes, carbon is one of the most boring materials around. In its purest form, you and I know of it as charcoal. But carbon has the ability to adopt a range of different forms. Diamonds, for example, are just carbon that has adopted a different chemical structure, completely changing its material properties to become something new, even though it is chemically identically the same. Graphene is a third form of carbon, and one that has similarities to the nanotubes. They are tiny rods of hard, solid, electrically conductive blocks that, when dispersed throughout the bulk polymer matrix, can carry electrons from one end of the tube to the other with incredible efficiency. At the same time, they can reinforce the polymer surrounding them, resulting in a product that is tougher, more resistant to heat, won't shrink in the wash, resistant to chemical damage, and much more besides. But Peter is a skeptic. He sees this wonder material and he wonders how durable it is. After all, whilst he is a man of science, he is also a man of action, who wants to take this material and use it to its fullest potential. He cannot have his web shooters short out on him mid-swing, and the more he uses these materials, the more they will degrade over time, and he'll have to replace them. So is he right to challenge the durability of carbon nanotubes? Peter's concern is called delamination, where a material will fracture into layers that then flake off separately. This can be seen in carbon fibre reinforced polymers, where a filament of carbon, in its graphite phase, are added to a composite material. Carbon fibres, though, are between 50 and 100 times bigger than carbon nanotubes, and for much of material science, the important thing here is the scale. Because the nanotubes are so incredibly small, they will cause less disruption to the polymer matrix than the comparatively bulky filaments of carbon fibre. Their small size means they will disrupt the packing of the polymer less, and so should be less prone to delamination. But the key word here is should. Honestly, the jury's still out there. Theoretically, the nanotubes are shielded by the polymer around them, so the durability of the material will depend on that. In most of the studies I've read, durability is hardly ever mentioned. This technology is still in the growth phase where scientists are unlocking the potential, probing the limits of what is and what is not possible. There simply isn't enough data out there to come to a conclusion. However, I would hypothesize that the durability would be critically dependent on the polymer around the nanotubes, as there are as many different types of polymer, actually more, than there are types of plastic in the world. And there's a lot we still don't know about this material from the spectrograph information. Go back and do some more analysis, Peter. We don't have enough to go on here. That's 3 materials down. Let's look at one final one. And here, for the first time, the science stumbles. What's going on, Insomniac? Didn't you have a chemist on your team to consult? Or perhaps we shouldn't be surprised, because Dr. Octopus is definitely not a chemist. He loves the physical sciences, but his passion in the comics is nuclear physics, and then after that, engineering. He can accomplish great things, but chemistry, above everything else, it's a language. It's a way of describing the shape and structure of molecules, using words and numbers so that everything is unique and clearly identifiable. To put it bluntly, 5-dimethylyl thiazole does not exist. It is, however, a fairly good stab at naming for someone who doesn't quite get the language, who has familiarity with chemistry but not the insider knowledge. Someone like Dr. Otto Octavius. Firstly, there's this pretty horrific yalal in the middle, which comes from a pretty terrible misinterpretation of the language. My first recommendation would be to say that this is a mistake that was typed in, and it should just be a single "ile". This produces a much more pleasing sounding 5-dimethylthiazole, which for a moment I thought might exist. However, something is missing. The key component here is the thiazole, the core part of the molecule that denotes the ring consisting of 3 carbon atoms, 1 nitrogen and 1 sulfur in this very particular arrangement. This certainly exists, and it can be found in nature. They are heterocyclic compounds that are key functional groups common in molecules such as vitamin B, organic dyes or fungicides. But the rest of the molecule's name, the 5-dimethyl, refers to other atoms which have been bolted onto this ring to give it extra functionality. When dealing with rings like this, the common convention is to find the central atom of the ring, in this case the sulfur, and count the atoms around that ring and denote where it is attached. Here we have the number 5 sitting on this carbon, all the way around the ring past the nitrogen, to be the final one before we come back to the sulfur. So we know we have a ring, and we know it's functionalized here, but what is a dimethyl group? Simply put, there is no such thing as a dimethyl group. There is a methyl group, it's just one extra carbon which comes with 3 hydrogens for the ride. You can have 2 of these groups separately, in which case we'd label the molecule as having dimethyl functionality, di here representing 2 of them. But you cannot bind 2 carbons on the 5th element of the thiazole ring. Because of the arrangement of the carbon, nitrogen and sulfur that constitute a thiazole, there is only space for 1 methyl group. You could alter the ring to make space, but then it wouldn't be a thiazole. Opening the bonds up turns it into a 4,5 dihydrothiazole, and that doesn't trip off the tongue anywhere near as easily. So if we only have 1 methyl group on the 5th atom on the ring, then what do we do with the other? Well, there are 2 options. Either the element is named wrong, and it is simply 5-methylthiazole, or there should be an extra number, say a 4, and the molecule is actually 4,5-dimethylthiazole, which the European Chemicals Agency lists as being both flammable and a health hazard, potentially carcinogenic, which means it's likely to cause cancer, and even potentially do the kind of minor genetic damage that can be passed on to your children. Peter is definitely right to call out this molecule's cytotoxicity. There is no way anyone would want that on their skin. 4 down, 6 to go, but it's probably time for a break. So far, we've learned that Insomniac Spider Man game is pretty smartly done when it comes to referring to some of the cooler aspects of material science, but they've fumbled the ball when it comes to basic chemistry language. Come on guys, what happened? But the biggest question is, why Peter Parker was assigned to study these unknown materials in the first place? If you want to build an octopoid terrasuit, then you need a reliable sourcing location for your materials. Otherwise, how are you going to repair or replace it when it gets damaged? There is no point building something from unknown fragments you find lying around, only half guessing if you know what the materials are when you start using them. You need something you know you can reliably purchase from reputable vendors. Perhaps Peter's job was not so vital as we've all been led to believe, and his real job was just label some spare parts lying around where the label had rubbed off so that they can be separated and disposed of safely in the correct waste stream. Disposing of waste chemicals and materials of these types is by no means a small task. You can't just put them all in the bin together. Who knows what will happen if they start to react? But well done, Insomniac. From the moment I booted up this weird little minigame and saw what you wanted me to do, my brain was tickled. You put in all that effort and I just want you to know it was appreciated. But if you're doing this again, and if you want a chemist on the team to consult, you know where to find me. Yours sincerely, a friend.